Welcome to The Explainer. World War II is almost always called the Good War, but for millions of Americans, the story was, well, a whole lot more complicated. Today, we're diving into the paradox of a nation fighting for freedom all over the world while denying those same freedoms to many of its own citizens right here at home.
To really get this, we have to start with these words from the civil rights leader A. Philip Randolph. Even before the U.S. was officially in the war, he was pointing out this huge hypocrisy. We're gearing up for war, but defense contractors won't hire black workers, and the military is still segregated. This was the central conflict on the home front. So you've got this incredible paradox, right? A war against fascism overseas just made the injustices at home impossible to ignore. We're going to see how this contradiction played out for three very different groups. African Americans fighting for what they called a double victory, Japanese Americans who faced internment, and Jewish refugees who were just looking for a safe place to land. Okay, so let's start with the African American community, because they responded to this paradox with a really powerful idea: the WWII campaign, a fight for two victories at the exact same time. Now, the WWII campaign, which was pushed hard by black newspapers like the Pittsburgh Courier, was just a brilliant move politically speaking. It basically said, hey, victory over fascism over there is completely tied to victory over racism right here. This wasn't just about, supporting the war. It was about demanding real democracy for all Americans. And this wasn't just talk. It had real teeth. When A. Philip Randolph threatened to bring a massive march to Washington, President Roosevelt had to listen. He issued Executive Order 8802, which banned discrimination in defense industries and set up the Fair Employment Practices Committee. It was a huge deal because it showed that organized, direct action could actually force the federal government to do something. And you can see the results right here. The number of black workers in defense industries literally tripled between 1942 and 1945. Now, the committee that was supposed to enforce this had its limits for sure, but this executive order was a massive economic lifeline for hundreds of thousands of people and a really important step forward. And that economic power, it lit a fire under the political movement. This new sense of urgency led to an absolute explosion in activism. Just look at the NAACP. Its membership grew 10 times over during the war. This built the organized foundation that would drive the civil rights movement for years and years to come. Now, this fight for equality wasn't just happening in the factories. It was happening inside the military itself. Over 1 million African Americans served in uniform, but they did it in a system that was just defined by segregation and paradox. And the contrast here is just wow. It's so stark. On one hand, you had most black soldiers stuck in segregated, non-combat roles, usually led by white officers. But on the other hand, the sheer pressure of the war started to crack open new doors. The number of black officers went from just 5 to over 7,000, and elite units started to finally get their chance to prove what they could do. And no one embodied this more than the legendary Tuskegee Airmen. These all-black pilot squadrons didn't just meet expectations, they completely shattered all these racist myths about their abilities. They flew so well that bomber crews, the guys whose lives were on the line, started specifically asking for the Red Tail Angels to protect them on the most dangerous bombing runs into Germany. But while African Americans were fighting to get in, another group of Americans was being systematically excluded. This was a devastating crisis of democracy, fueled by the exact same kind of racial prejudice the WWII campaign was fighting against. So, in February 1942, President Roosevelt signs Executive Order 9066. Citing national security, it basically gave the military the power to create exclusion zones, which led to the mass, forcible removal of people of Japanese descent from the West Coast. They lost everything: their homes, their businesses, their freedom. Just like that. And the sheer scale of this is just staggering. We're talking about over 110,000 people forced into remote internment camps, imprisoned behind barbed wire with armed guards, all because of their ancestry. And here's the part that is just so hard to wrap your head around. The vast majority of them, over 70,000, were American citizens. They were denied their constitutional rights with no trial, no hearing, no evidence of disloyalty whatsoever. It took decades, but eventually Congress investigated this, and their conclusion? It was damning. The commission found it wasn't about military necessity at all. It was, and I'm quoting here, race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership.
And that failure of political leadership, that inaction, showed up somewhere else too. As the absolute horror of the Holocaust was unfolding in Europe, America's doors remained, for the most part, shut to people fleeing for their lives. This timeline, it just shows a heartbreaking pattern of missed chances. Time after time, opportunities to help were just lost. A big international conference in 1938 did nothing. In 1939, a ship, the St. Louis, full of Jewish refugees, was literally turned away from American shores. That same year, a bill that could have saved 20,000 Jewish children was defeated in Congress, thanks to a mix of political maneuvering and public anti-Semitism. Finally, and I mean finally, in 1944, the War Refugees Board was created, and its work was heroic, saving around 200,000 people. But it was a desperate last-minute move, and it came only after millions had already been murdered. It was, as everyone has judged it since, far too little and far too late. So after all this, what do we take away from these incredible wartime contradictions? What's the real legacy of the good war on the home front? The war didn't magically fix America's racial problems. If anything, it put them under a giant magnifying glass. The fight for that double victory, the experience of soldiers fighting for freedoms they themselves didn't have, the injustices of internment and inaction, all of it created this undeniable, unstoppable momentum for change. In the end, the very war that made America a global superpower also forced it to take a long, hard look in the mirror. It exposed that huge gap between America's ideals and its reality, and in doing so, it absolutely set the stage for the monumental struggles and triumphs of the civil rights movement that was just around the corner.